Going through these stories in more detail with me is Noah Khogali, the political commentator and I think Conservative councillor, if I'm not wrong. Noah, good morning.
Morning, Rosie. How are you?
I'm well. Let's start with this idea. Planning reforms. How would you feel if a pylon goes up within 500 metres of your home, but your bills were cheaper? Does that feel like a good trade-off?
Absolutely. Look, this is all about the greater good, really. The UK needs a significant amount of investment in its energy transmission infrastructure as well as energy infrastructure as a whole. And that's something that, the last government struggled with making sure happened. And this government are equally seeing the pushback from some local communities, some pressure groups about. But it's something that every political party understands now is incredibly important and needs to happen if the UK is ever going to get anywhere near its net zero targets.
So the bill discount scheme, that's the equivalent to about £250 a year over 10 years. That'll be funded by the energy firms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. They're the ones that are ultimately working in those communities, and that there is other potential for wider community investment funds to be more formalised across other bits of energy infrastructure, whether that's substations or onshore wind as well, making sure that communities do see more of the practical benefits of having that infrastructure near them. We all understand how important it is to have new energy transmission countrywide, but it is hard, understandably, for local communities that are seeing potentially a significant amount of even just construction disruption near them to have that community investment so they feel a part of the project. And ultimately, it really does help with those relationships between those people working on the ground and those communities. If that kind of investment can happen, lots of these parts of the country are, especially rural, do need that investment, and this is a wonderful way of going about trying to make sure it happens.
Yeah, and the idea is to make life more tricky for the NIMBYs, which will be frustrating if you are one of those people. Front page of The Guardian. Prisons to get hundreds more cells in case the summer riots happen again. I'm sure we don't need a reminder of what happened with the fires being set at hotels and then the significant sentencing for people who took part, particularly in the Stockport riots. But prisons are being prepared to cope with what could be a sudden influx of offenders. Do you think this preparation is necessary?
I think it's absolutely necessary. I think there was a point last year, wasn't there, where we were only 100 prison spaces short of being over capacity. And ultimately, this does feel a little bit like a sticking plaster. And, those schools that end up putting temporary classrooms up that are still there a decade later.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we do need to be building more prisons. That's the only kind of real solution here. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the government start considering sending some prisoners to other countries in the way that other European countries have done.
Is that
and
the
the
right
inevitable
solution?
drama that will come from that.
I mean, we've got the sentencing review that's due to report fairly shortly to try and look at actually, it was both the Conservatives and the Labour government who are saying in the election campaign, we want to send more people to prison and for longer, because that seems to be popular with the public as a sentiment, but doesn't necessarily work in terms of things like preventing, people reoffending. And maybe we are sending too many people to prison.
Well, I think we do need to reevaluate the way that we understand how the justice system works and should work, and should be focusing on rehabilitation and making sure that when people do, in a situation where someone does go to prison, that they come out of it with the skills and mentality that won't get them immediately back in there. We have quite high reoffending rates, and that suggests that the system doesn't really work. Obviously, that's a longer term shift in culture, and in the immediate term we just need more prison spaces. But in the long term, I'd love to see a system which is more focused on rehabilitation, but also really tough on the people that have demonstrated that that's not something that they are interested in and are committed to reoffending.
Let's talk about Reform UK and the row that's taken place over the weekend. The very latest in that is that a senior lawyer appointed by Reform UK to independently investigate allegations against the MP Rupert Lowe has denied making comments that he attributed to her. So the row takes sort of another twist and turn. Do you think Reform have scored a bit of an own goal this weekend?
Massively. Look, ultimately, there's only a handful of MPs, and having this kind of drama this early on kind of validates what people on a number of sides of the political spectrum were saying before the election that this just wasn't a serious party. The allegations are serious, and the drama over the weekend has been pretty tough to watch, given the allegations. But Rupert Lowe ultimately also has been one of Reform's higher profile MPs since coming in, and has developed his own kind of sect of the party, or the popular right, or the populist right, sorry. And that's going to be incredibly tough for Reform to manage going forward, even if this investigation comes to nothing. It sounds like the bridges between him and Farage have been well and truly burned. And as a result, this is just a problem that definitely won't go away for them.
Can they afford to do that, though?
Well, I don't think it's really up to them at this point. It sounds like Rupert Lowe is pretty done with Farage. And ultimately, this, again, rings true about what everyone said before the election, that Farage is a wonderful protest politician, but nothing more.
He said that Reform isn't just a protest party.
Pardon?
He said that Nigel Farage just said Reform is not a protest party.
Ultimately, Rupert Lowe, who's 20% or was 20% of their parliamentary membership, disagrees with him, and seems to be saying that it is led by, I think he called him a messiah, if I'm right.
He did, yeah. That was on Friday.
When you've got 20% of your party calling you a protest party led by a messiah, that's not a great sign.
No. Alan Titchmarsh is on the front page of the Times. He's going to be interviewed on Times Radio Breakfast a little bit later. He says we should avoid avocados. Why so?
So this comes from the quite widely known environmental impact. I think it's 5 times more impactful than a banana or something, and everyone's known that for a while. But there is also an incredibly worrying connection with cartels, who have essentially started seeing avocados in Mexico specifically as green gold, and realizing that they can make a significant amount of money by essentially trying to steal the avocado industry away from farms, and pivot away from drugs. A number of issues, obviously, but so I implore millennials, when you're eating those avocados in the morning, think of Alan Titchmarsh telling you about the environmental impacts and the cartels.
So will you avoid them?
I don't really eat them anyway, so it's not
right. So that's an easy stance for you to take. Also, the other thing the paper talks about is the case of avocado hand. And I've got a friend who severed a tendon in her little finger because she hit the knife, when you open up the avocado, and then instead of sort of putting it on a plate or on a chopping board, she used the knife to whack into the centre of the stone to get it out, and the knife slipped down the stone through the avocado and through her little finger. I'm sorry for the very gruesome picture at this time, and still can't move it properly, and that was about 4 years ago. So a warning to anyone eating avocados, if you've chosen to eat them, to then eat them carefully. It can be, Noah, a bit of a minefield working out what is and what isn't the right thing to eat. How much do you pay attention, actually, to the climate impact of the food that you put on your plate?
Being completely honest, not massively. I joke about the avocados mainly because I'm not eating them, but ultimately it's of a negligible impact worldwide. And as long as I try to be British as much as I can, because I'd like to support British farmers and British farming. But ultimately, if my raspberries are coming from Morocco, it's not something that's going to put me off buying them.
Well, Alan Titchmarsh says there's a lot to be said for cornflakes, Weetabix and Shreddies. And good morning to Frank in Edinburgh, who says the best breakfast both for health and carbon footprint is, of course, porridge. That's a recommendation if you haven't yet had your breakfast. Talking about things that are ridiculous, HS2 spent, we already know about the absolutely ludicrous spiralling cost of HS2. The company behind HS2, though, spent £20,000 on, get ready, a Lego model of one of its railway stations. What did you make of this, Noah?
So I grappled with this a little bit because, number one, I'm slightly biased because I love Lego, and the model of Old Oak Common does look wonderful. But at the same time, if you'd given me, I don't know, a week, I could have done it for. Look, I'll let them have it for 15. It doesn't look like something that's £20,000 worth of work. And kind of compounds this narrative about HS2 being quite frivolous with taxpayers' money. As useful as it is for as a community engagement tool, which is what it was, to demonstrate how Old Oak Common was and make it a little bit more accessible, I'm not sure that was the best use of £20,000 of taxpayer money.
Yeah, 15,000 Lego bricks to make it. Yes, if you were cross about the £100 million spent on the Bat Tunnel, you can also be a little bit miffed by the £20,000 Lego model of Old Oak Common as well. Noah, thank you so much for joining me. Noah Khogali, the political commentator, going through the paper.